Hi and welcome to another very exciting tutorial. Before we get started, let me explain why there was no tutorial last week. In fact, I was quite busy recording a series of videos for a Udemy course about Swift and iOS development. This course is actually ideal for everyone who just wants to start iOS development with Swift, for people who never programmed before, for people who are switching from another language and want to familiarize themselves with Swift and iOS development itself. So because you're so great, I want to give something back to you for over 3,000 subscriptions. So in the video description below, you will find a link to the Udemy course. And the first 30 people who will write a comment under this video with a tutorial suggestion, the first 30 people will get the access to this Udemy course for free. So if you want to know the basics about Swift development and want to get started on a low-level basis, then this course is ideal for you. And again, the first 30 people who comment below with a tutorial idea for this channel will get the access to this Udemy course for free. So knowing that and moving to our tutorial of today, this is what we're going to do. It looks actually pretty simple. It's just an image. But if you do a little swipe gesture, you will see that there is a sidebar coming from the left. And this sidebar is animated using UIDynamic's, which were introduced in iOS 7. And it uses the new blur view of iOS 8. And we're actually going to create our very own component that you can reuse in every app you want to publish or just for fun. So this component can be used everywhere because we're going to program this very generic. So let's go ahead, fire up Xcode, and let's create a new single view application for that. Single view application. Let's call it Sidebar or Blurry Sidebar. And let's create it next and create it on the desktop. So there is our project. Let me resize this window a bit. So, actually we're going to start with some very basic stuff, because as you can see, there are 3 items, and you can put as many items as you want into this sidebar, because we're using a table view controller for that. And so we're going to create our very own table view controller class and not associate this with a storyboard element or a storyboard view controller. So we will just create a new table view controller, pressing Command N on the keyboard, or going to File, New File, Source of iOS, Cocoa Touch class, and this is going to be the Sidebar UI Table View Controller. So if I say that this is a subclass of UI Table View Controller, the auto-completion automatically adds Table View Controller at the end of the class name I typed. So let's say next and create. And let's first get rid of all the stuff we don't need. Actually, this is nothing. This we don't need. What is this? Can move? No. Move? No. Commit editing style? No. Can it? No. Self-row at index path? Yes. So we will remove that. We won't need viewed at load. We won't need did receive memory warning. Let's also get rid of these warning comments. Actually, let's get rid of all the comments. Okay, all right. So let's first create a delegate, because we want to know when the user actually tapped on one of these sidebar items. We want to know about it. So the ideal the ideal thing we want to create now is a delegate. So let's write protocol, and we'll call this Sidebar Table View Controller Delegate. All right. And there will be only one method, which is sidebar control did select row. And this method is going to get an index path as a parameter. This is an NSIndex path because we're tapping on a cell which gives us an index path, and we will then use this index path to pass it through to the necessary position in code or at runtime when the user actually taps the menu item. So let's create some properties, which is first the delegate, which is a sidebar table view controller delegate, which is optional. And also let's create a data source for our table view, let's say table data, which is going to be an array of strings. So using the Swift syntax, we're using some we're specifying the type here and initialize it with an empty array. So the sections of this table view will be just one, and the rows will be the table data dot count. All right, so we know that there is going to be one section. We know how many items there will be since we did a count on the table view data. So now we have to create the self-row at index path method, which will be a little different than we did in in all the previous tutorials, since we always used the storyboard and a table view controller. We could always use this DQ reusable cell with identifier for index path. Since we now create this table view completely programmatically, we cannot use a constant here. We have to use a variable here. This is going to be an optional UI table view cell. So we're adding a question mark because it can be nil. We need to specify that, and we will not use all these parameters. We will only use the reuse identifier, which we will call cell. And so we also have to cast that as an optional table view cell. All right, now why are we doing that? Well, table view cells can be recycled, but once they are not nil, we don't have to do the initialization and the configuration again, because all the table view cells look the same. The only thing that is different is the text that we're going to display. So as you can see, when we look at the example, there is always no background color. There is always this selected view, which looks like this. This is always the same. Only the text label actually changes. So we're going to configure the cell, not directly here. So we check if our cell is nil. So when it's nil, then we have to initialize it. So what we do is saying cell is going to be a UI table view cell, and we're going to initialize it with a UI table view cell style, which is default, and a reuse identifier, which is cell. And now we're going to configure the cell. Actually, so let me position this comment. So what we are going to say, and now what's important is that we have to unwrap the cell, since we know that it is nil. We have that, yeah, it is nil. We now filled it with, or we initialized it with a UI table view cell, but we have to unwrap it, saying now that the background color is going to be UI color dot clear color. We're also going to say that cell text label text color is going to be UI color dark text color. Let's say that. Okay. So, and as you can see, there is when you tap on one of these items, then you get a nice highlight behind it. So what we are going to do is creating a, what's wrong here? Text color. Forgot that. Text label.text. color. All right. So what we're going to do is create a selected cell view, which is or a selected background view for the cell. So let's create a selected view, which is going to be a UI view. We're going to initialize it with a frame, cdirect make. It will start at 0, 0. We'll have a width of the cell itself, its frame, its size, its width, and the cell itself, frame, size, height. All right. So there is our selected view. Now we have to adjust this view. So let's say selected view dot background color equals UI color black color. And we will now say that we're going to use a color with an alpha component, and we will set the alpha, so the transparency, to 0.3, so that we will still see the nice blur effect, and this looks quite good actually. So now that we have a background color, let's now add this selected view to our cell, accessing the selected background view property of the cell and say selected view. So now that we have created the cell and now that it is initialized, this is only done once per cell. We now can add after this if statement a cell.textLabel.text and add the actual text, accessing our table data array that we've created earlier, and accessing the index path, accessing the index of this array using index path dot row, since we're in a table view, and we can use the index path to know which of the items we click. So this is index path 0, 1, 2. Which is corresponding with the elements that are stored within this array. So now that we have completed the cell for row at index path method, let's also add another method of the table view, which is the height. So let me search that, height for row at index path, and let's just return 45 pixels here. And now we have created a delegate, which is called sidebar control did select row. So each time the user taps on a row, we need to pass that information on to our delegate. To do that, we will use the table view did select row at index path method, which is a table view delegate method, and actually just say delegate. We know this is optional, so we have to use a question mark here. Sidebar control did select row, and we just pass the index path to this delegate method. So this is our table view controller that will display all of the items in our sidebar. Now, to continue, we will now create the actual sidebar component. Again, pressing Command N on the keyboard, creating a new Cocoa Touch class. We're calling this Sidebar, and this is going to be a subclass of NSObject, nothing special, just an NSObject, no fancy UI stuff in there. So let's create that, and there it is, nice and clean. This NSObject, well, we inherit everything that comes from NSObject, but what we're also going to do is we're going to adopt our delegate, which is the sidebar table view controller delegate, and we will immediately get an error since this delegate method here, sidebar control did select row, is not optional. We have to implement it. So let's do it. Sidebar control did select, and let's just keep it there to get rid of the error. We will fill this method later. But we will also need a protocol for some delegate methods here within this class, since we want this control to be able to tell us in code when the sidebar, when an item of the sidebar was selected, and also when the sidebar will open and when the sidebar will close. So there will be there will be two actually two optional delegate methods here. One will be not optional, since you're going to need that unless, well, the whole control would be useless if you wouldn't know which item of the menu bar was tapped. So to create actually optional delegate methods, we need to specify them as and need to define this as an Objective-C protocol using an @ and objc. This is also necessary if you want to mark your code so that it can be accessed from Objective-C code. But you also need to mark protocols with the Objective-C attribute if you want to specify optional requirements, as we want to do now. So this is going to be the Sidebar Delegate. And we will create a function here, which is sidebar did select button at index. And now we don't need to pass an index path. Actually, it's absolutely perfect if we just pass an index to our code later. So let's just keep it there with an integer. And now we can say optional function sidebar will close, and an optional function sidebar will open. All right, and see, when I remove this attribute here, we get an error because optional can only be applied to members of an Objective-C protocol. So let's bring it back, make the compiler happy, and just continue. We're going to need some attributes for our component here, which is going to be a bar width, which is a CG float. And let's say it's going to be 150 pixels in width. So what we're also going to need is a Tableview top inset, sidebar Tableview top inset, which is going to be 64 pixels. What we're also going to need is a container view for our Tableview controller. So let's create one, sidebar container view, which is a UI view. Initialize it, UI view. What else? We need a Tableview controller. So this is going to be a sidebar Tableview controller. And here we are going to use our own sidebar Tableview controller that we have created earlier. So let's also initialize it. And we are also going to need an origin view. Origin view. Also going to be a UI view equals UI view. Or let's just create this as not nil and initialize it later. We're also going to need an animator, since we're using UIDynamicS. What we need, you see this nice bouncy animation here and this gravitational force that draws the sidebar to the right, and the collision at this specific point, which lets it bounce right at this position. This is all done using UIDynamicS, and therefore we're going to need a UIDynamicAnimator. So let's also create this animator. Let's do it later. Let's define a variable. Animator. So this is a UIDynamicAnimator. Also, we're going to initialize this later, and we're going to need a delegate, which is a sidebar delegate, which is optional again, and we're going to need a bool, and this is going to be is sidebar open. This is going to be a question, and we'll set it to false right now. All right, so there are constants. We have our sidebar controller. We have our origin view, which also is a constant and there are variables. So now we are going to need some initializers for our sidebar class. We will just to have one later to initialize it. You'll give this a, don't forget the override, super init. So let's give it a really naked initializer here, which does nothing else but allocating the memory. So let's also create a custom initializer, which will give us the source view or the origin view, just giving it another name in this initializer method, which is going to be a UI view, and also the menu items that we are going to get to display. So this is again an array of strings. And this is actually our custom initializer. And there we also have to call super init. And now let's do some adjustments here. So our origin view is going to be the source view. All right. So we can reuse that, use that within our class. Then let's say that the sidebar table view controller, which is this one, its table data is going to be these menu items that we get. Also let's initialize our animator. So using UIDynamicAnimator, and we need a reference view, which is going to be the origin view. The reference view is actually where the animations will take place. And in order for this to work properly, we're going to use gesture recognizers that recognize swipe gestures to the left and to the right. So we need to create these gesture recognizers here in the init method. So let's create a show gesture recognizer, which is going to be a UI swipe gesture recognizer. Initialize it with a UI swipe gesture recognizer with the target self and an action which we will call handle swipe. Don't forget the colon here. And now let's configure this gesture recognizer, saying that its direction is going to be UI swipe gesture recognizer direction right. So when you swipe to the right, then we want to show the sidebar. And when you swipe to the left, well, we get to that in a minute. So let's first say that the origin view add gesture recognizer, our show gesture recognizer. And now let's create the hide gesture recognizer. Which is also UI swipe gesture recognizer, and initialize it with target self, action handle swipe. We are going to use the same method here to handle both, just using some if statements later to check which direction was actually used. So also let's configure this. So the hide gesture recognizer and its direction is going to be UI swipe gesture recognizer direction and now left. So when you swipe to the left, so swipe to right and display the sidebar, and swipe to the left and the sidebar hides. So, and also let's add the origin, the gesture recognizer to the origin view, saying add gesture recognizer, and this time the hide gesture recognizer. All right, now we have to set up our sidebar, which we haven't done before. So let's create a function for that, which is going to be set up sidebar, which has no parameters, and we will call this just before we initialize the animator. So say setup. Come on, set up sidebar. There it is. All right. Now nothing happens at this moment. So let's give some life to this function. And the first thing we're going to need, what we are going to need to do is give our sidebar a frame so that it can be displayed. And we're using a container view for that, which we've already defined here. So let's access this sidebar container view and its frame. and let's say cgrect make, and the X position is actually going to be a negative bar width so that we can see it, so that it's off the screen, and let's also give -1 for a little tolerance. And also the origin, the Y position is going to be the same as the origin view. Origin view's Y position, so let's say frame origin Y. The width we've already defined, this is the bar width, and the height is also going to be the origin view dot frame dot size dot height. So you could also place this menu not over the whole screen, but also in a little view, let's say only half of the screen, which could be suitable for your application in specific cases. That's that. So let's now create the background color. So this is, again, the sidebar container view. It's background color. It's going to be UI color, clear color. And let's also say that we disable sidebar container view clips to bounds, so that we disable that subviews are confined to the bounds of the view. So let's say false here. And now let's add our sidebar container view to the origin view. So actually, let's add it to this view that we see here so that we can display it later. So origin view, add subview, sidebar container view. All right. Now we want this, as you can see, we have this nice blur effect here, which we all know from iOS 7, and it's really easy to apply this blur effect within iOS 8, since we just have to create a little blur view. To do that, we just say define a constant, which is going to be our blur view, which is a UI visual effect view, and this UI visual effect view is going to be initialized with an effect, which is going to be, let me give some space here, which is going to be a UI visual effect. No, what's it? UI, no, not UI visual effect. UI blur effect. UI blur effect, and we have to initialize this again using a UI blur effect style, which is the light blur effect style. And after that, we have to give this view a frame. So blur view dot frame, and this is going to be the same frame as the sidebar container view and its bounds. So after that, we will now add this blur view to our sidebar container view, saying add subview, and now adding our blur view. All right, so this blur view is now placed one layer under the table view controller, which we're going to create now, and we are also going to add sidebar table view controller, add the delegate, which is self. And now we have to set a frame for the table view controller's table view as well. So sidebar controller dot table view dot frame. This is going to be the same as sidebar container view dot frame. No, let's say bounds. All right. So now let's also deactivate the clips to bounds for this table view controller. Clips table view clips to bounds false. Let's set the separator cells, separator cell style, which is none in our case, since we don't see any separator lines here. So let's say sidebar table view controller table view separator style equals UI table view cell separator style. And let's say none. And now let's also set the background color, which is sidebar table view controller table view background color equals UI color clear color, so that we can see our nice blur view. And we will also want to deactivate the scrolls to top feature, since we don't need that here. Scrolls to top, also set this to false. And now let's set the edge and set that we already defined. So sidebar tableview controller, tableview, content inset equals UI edge inset make. And we only have a top inset, which is the sidebar tableview top inset, and the rest is just 0. All right, now let's reload sidebar tableview controller. Let's reload our tableview so that we can display the data. And now let's add this table view to our container view. So sidebar table view controller. So far, so good. What's wrong here? Of course, we have to add the table view here, not the whole table view controller. All right. Now we have actually did everything we could here in the setup sidebar method. So now we have to deal with our handle swipe methods that we call when a swipe occurs on the screen. So let's go ahead, create this function handle swipe. The parameter in this case is a recognizer, and it's a UI swipe gesture recognizer. No return type here. And yes, what we do is first check which direction, in which direction the swipe occurred. So we just say if recognizer direction UI swipe. Oh, it's not a swipe just to recognize a direction. It's just a swipe just to recognize it. So if recognizer.direction equals UI swipe just to recognize a direction. Let's start with left. Then we want to show the sidebar, and else we want to hide it. No, in this case, if we swipe to the left, we want to hide it, and else we want to show it. So we will have to write a function for this as well. So let's just write this function first, say function show sidebar, and we ask if it should open, which is going to be a bool. All right, and if we swipe to the left, we want to hide it, so show sidebar false, so should open no, and show sidebar true. All right, and what we also are going to do here is calling our delegate and telling him that the sidebar will close. And in this case, we also need to add a question mark here. And in this case, delegate question mark sidebar will open. All right, since this is optional, we have to place some question marks here. So this is all we have to do for our handle swipe method here. So there are two methods missing, which we have to fill with some life. So let's just start with the sidebar control did select row, since this is just one line. We will again call the delegate with a question mark and say sidebar did select, and now just say index path dot row, so we can we access the sidebar controller did select row. In this method, we have a parameter index path from our table view controller, and in our sidebar class itself, we have another delegate method, which is sidebar did select button at index, and this just receives an integer which we can later use in an ordinary view controller or wherever. So after this last delegate method is filled with some life, let's now move to the fun stuff, animating our sidebar. So let's first access the animator and remove all behaviors first. After that, we will set our flag sidebar open to should open, because we are going to use this now to define the direction of our animation. So let's first create a gravity in X direction, which is a CG float. And now we will just use a simple if statement to say, so this means if should open, then let's say that our gravity X value is 0.5, else, so if we want to close it, minus 0.5. So this was the gravity. Now let's create a magnitude, which is also a CG float, doing the same if should open. If it should open, let's say the magnitude is 20, else it's minus 20. So what else? We need a boundary where for the which is for the collision with the. So this is actually our boundary here. I'll have to define that as well. So let's say boundary X CG float, and also here should open. If it should open, let's say it's the bar width, and else, as you remember, we created the content, the container view at when we initialized it, we put it to minus bar width -1. We're also going to set it to this position again if we want to close it, so minus bar width -1. So far so good. Now we have to create some behaviors for our animator. This is quite easy. We have a gravity behavior, which is going to be a UI gravity behavior. And we're going to initialize it with some items. And the items required here is just a view that we want to animate. So this is a sidebar container view. So now we have to adjust this gravity behavior using a gravity direction. And therefore, we need a CG vector mask, CG vector, and we're going to make it using the function CG vector make, and the X direction is what we already defined, which is gravity X, and we don't want a Y direction for our vector. So this is the gravity behavior, and we will add this behavior to our animator, a gravity behavior. All right. Now, after the gravity behavior, we have to handle the collision. So let's also create a behavior for that, which is the collision behavior, which is UI collision behavior. And we're also going to initialize this with our sidebar container view, which we always have to place in an array, since we could apply this behaviors to multiple views. So this is the collision behavior. So let's say collision behavior, add a boundary with identifier from point. All right. So the identifier is going to be sidebar boundary from point. Now let's make a CG point make, and the X position of this point is the boundary X, and the Y is going to be 20 to point. So let's again make a CG point, which is going to be the boundary X, and the Y point, the Y coordinate is going to be the origin view dot frame dot size dot height. All right. Now let's also add this collision behavior to our animator using add behavior, collision behavior. All right. This should work. All right, good. So now what we need is a push behavior, which we're going to use our magnitude. So let's add a push behavior, which is a UI push behavior. Initialize it again, UI push behavior with items, and there we also get a mode. So let's first add our sidebar container view, and in this case we are going to use the instantaneous push behavior mode. And now let's add the magnitude. So push behavior magnitude is going to be our magnitude. And finally, let's also add this behavior to our animator. Animator, add behavior, push behavior. Great. Now let's add our a dynamic behavior to our sidebar. So sidebar behavior, which is a UI dynamic item behavior. UI dynamic item behavior also initializes with our sidebar container view. And now we will define the elasticity for the animation. So sidebar behavior elasticity. Let's set this to 0.3. And now finally, let's also add this behavior to our animator, sidebar behavior. And actually, that's all there is. Now, if this works, that would be cool. To test this, we will simply bring up, now let me first, I've got an image here somewhere. Yeah, that's good. I have an image here, just put it into the image assets, and we will then just go to our storyboard. Let's deactivate the size classes for now. Just place an image view into our view controller here and add this image. So maybe we should do a little aspect fill here so that it looks nice. And now we can just go to our view controller. Let's say in the UDidLoad method, and we will create a sidebar here. So let's say var sidebar as a property, which is a sidebar, and initialize the sidebar. So we also are going to adopt the Sidebar Delegate, which requires one method, which is the sidebar DidSelectButton@Index method. So sidebar DidSelectButton@Index. So let's just keep it there for the moment. And we will now in UDidLoad initialize our sidebar using our custom initializer. Give it a source view, which is self.view, and some menu items, which is going to be first item, second item, and let's say a funny item, whatever. And we don't need to add a subviewer on anything here. This should actually just work. So let me close the demo application and run this. And now let's see if this works. Well, there's no error. The image is rotated, but that's not interesting for the moment. And there it is. Nice and blurry. So this is great. Now, actually, you can also see that there happens something when you click on the button. And now let's just do some funny stuff. So let's say if index equals 0, then there is let's also create an outlet for our image view so that we can access it. So let's say image view here. And let's say when we click on the first button, you want the image view to turn red. So let's say image view background color equals UI color, clear color, red color. And let's also remove the image itself. Image view dot image equals no. All right. So let's see if this works. So open the sidebar, click on the first item, and nothing happens. because we haven't added the delegate to the sidebar. So let's say sidebar.delegate equals self. Let's try this again. Run this, and there we go. Pretty nice. And let's make this, let's undo this if we say else if index equals 0, image view, background color, UI color, clear color, image view dot image equals UI image, and I think this was called image 2. So let's just use named image 2, and let's try this. So there we go. Maybe we should not initialize this image view directly here in the storyboard since it is rotated. So let me just remove that here and also initialize this here. Let's just copy that and put it in the view that load. And this should be a little nicer. There we go. So as you can see, we have finished our very own component. We can use it pretty nicely. We can add as many items as we want. So let's add another item. Run this again, and you see expected separator. Oh, I forgot the bracket here. So as you can see, we can add as many items as we want. Sometimes even something happens when we click on them. It's pretty easy to use, actually. You can place this component, as I told you earlier, in every view and every UI view, and you can reuse it all the time. You have learned how to apply the UI blur effect of iOS 8. You have learned how to handle UI dynamic animators, and you also have learned how to generically create components by yourself which are highly reusable. So have fun creating your own components, and don't forget to comment below if you want to get free access to the Udemy course for iOS development with Swift for free.